Hey, how's it going? Just wanted to talk real quick about a couple things about what Tim Pool talked about. Jonathan Haidt, Joe Rogan, kind of all mentioned same thing recently. Just start talking about the start of SJWs, where they came from, what's going on there, and also kind of want to focus on Tim Pool's critiques of capitalism or market economies. Essentially, we're in a position where the SJWs come from. They came from feminist, radical feminist ideology, which has been taught in universities, has been taught in schools for decades now, for generations. It's nothing new. In fact, it's extremely surprising how old these arguments are. A lot of these arguments date back to the 60s, to the 70s, and nothing's really changed. Why did it surface now? Why is it coming back? Well, I mean, a lot when you talk about feminist movement, feminist activity, um, it's categorized into three large waves: first wave, second wave, third wave. At least in the United States. But second wave feminism, it's so similar to what we have today. There's very little that's different between what the people believed in the 60s and 70s and what we believe today. The big difference is that when it came to the 70s, a lot of women just aged out of it. Once you reach 35, 40 years old, you just don't have the same sway as the people who are currently making waves in politics are. I mean, a lot more people are going to just realistically going to take AOC seriously when she's young and good looking than when she's 49. It's just the way things are. You can have the same feminist ideology, and you can tell women, hey, we should act this way, or tell men, hey, you should act this way. We should change society for this and that. But you'll just it's just how glamour works. That if you're good looking, male or female, more people are going to take you seriously. Um, especially if you're like on the up and up. If you're kind of some dude in his basement or something, people generally tend to take you less seriously. Um, anyways, long story short, society kind of aged out of feminism, at least second wave feminism. It's not necessarily that you know their critiques weren't correct or that their critiques were necessarily overthrown. It's just that people got bored with it and moved on. South Park makes this really great comment about it. I think 2 seasons ago, where at the end of the season, they're saying, oh, things are getting all politically correct again. It's going to be another 8 years or so of this. That's exactly what happened in the '90s too. Essentially, the people who are radicals who make it onto the stage um, eventually realize you can't have it all. You can't, be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company and stay home with your kids and, decide to dress and look however you want and attract the same people that you want to attract. That, realistically, there's give and take in society. That in order to, date someone you want, you have to be the kind of person who that person wants to date. And you've got to work hard for it. And it goes for both men and women. A lot of what you're seeing now is just society working through this same ideology again. Essentially, what happened is that in the 70s, um, as people got older and just the focus of society moved on to other things, and that'll happen again. The same people today who are radical feminists who are you know protesting and in the streets and demanding this and that. Um, they will get old and people will stop listening to them. No one wants to listen to someone who's over 30, especially if they're 15, 16, 17. It's just the way it works. And, you know, edgy humor will come back. People who are profane will come back. Um, Tim Pool talks a lot about this, that the right is, you know, not necessarily a monolith, but they all stick together while the left is having a civil war. I want to point out that, the right already had their civil war. It was Donald Trump. Um, Most people on the right, didn't like him. Even his supporters didn't like Donald Trump. Um, it Why did they vote for him? Big things were the Supreme Court. That was a huge argument going into the 2016 election. Essentially, that you gotta have a Republican because at the very least you will have those Supreme Court judges. That was huge. Besides that, I mean, most people didn't like Donald Trump, even who voted for him, and I think Trump's gonna have a much better time this time around because he does, he has proven himself far better. I mean, he didn't turn out to be Hitler. He didn't, have concentration camps. He didn't start deporting American citizens. Nothing that people thought would happen actually happened. Um, Long story short, I want to also, that's where social justice warriors move came from. The same, radical feminist ideology that is the same as it's been, 1920s. There's been some additions, in the 60s and the 70s. There's been some additions in the 90s, but it's essentially the same. That, our society is evil, that the language we use is wrong, that, the way men and women behave together is wrong. Um, Long story short, it's going to wear itself out. People are going to get tired of it, going to get bored of it, and eventually these people get old and no one's going to listen to them. And no one is going to take advice from an old lady who, doesn't have any kids, doesn't have any friends. Maybe she says she has friends, but her friends are all married with kids and don't have time for her. No one wants to take advice from someone who's deeply sad like that. So what's going to happen is the prevailing culture is just going to, continue on and march along, and eventually we'll get back to the edgy jokes and the funny humor. And everyone kind of knows this. I mean, that's why South Park hasn't been canceled. That's why It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia hasn't been canceled. They know that this is going to be 1, 2, 3 years, and then we'll, 2025 rolls around. If the people, if Danny DeVito still wants to be making profane jokes, he'll still be able to make them. Um, Now moving on, just to Tim Pool, he throws out these things. Oh, this is why I'm not a fan of capitalism. This is why I'm not a fan of free markets. I'm not gonna say he doesn't understand. I'm gonna give him all the credit in the world, but it's one of those things. It's a lot of times people miss what a market is. A free market is. A free market will just produce whatever the society wants. So any group of people. You could look at a world population. You could look at an office. You could look at a classroom. A free market will produce anything those people value. So with the Vikings, they really, they had essentially much closer to free market armies than what we have today. Um, what you have in that situation is extremely effective armies, because that's what the culture valued. Of course, as the Vikings became less warlike, their culture transformed into something completely different. Same thing with the Spanish. Um, while you had people conquering land in the name of the king, they were essentially given the right to conquer land and take gold and whatever. But a lot of them were privately funded. A lot of them, you'd say, well, if I'm able to plunder 100 tons of gold or whatever from this continent, I'll give you 25% if you give me X amount of dollars to do my mission. So I mean, a lot of these armies in the past were, and even under Queen Elizabeth, the British Empire under Queen Elizabeth as well, much closer to free market armies than we have today, and um, that's because those cultures, that's what they valued. And so Tim just made a video about oh, this is what the free market produces: babies who are afraid of clapping. Well, I mean, look, our society is very torn right now between we don't want to offend people. We don't want, if someone says, hey, I've got PTSD, please don't make loud clapping noises around me. You would respect that in your own personal life. We're not used to a group of people coming in and taking advantage of your respect of other people and taking advantage of your empathy and saying, well, now I want you to use this language. Now I want you to dress this way. Now I want you to talk this way. Now I want you to give me 60% of your paycheck because I said so. People aren't used to aren't prepared for what social justice warriors are asking of them. So when they start small, just one, they say, hey, this statue is of a leader of the Confederacy. He fought for slavery, so I want it removed. Okay, I mean, Scott Ian said that is a very small ask. Give it to them. Who cares? I mean, it's just a statue. No one cares. No one knows this guy. But then they say, well, what about George Washington? What about Benjamin Franklin? They owned slaves. Yes, I mean, there's a whole historical thing about that, but look, you're forcing people to go by your culture. And then it's like, well, what about Martin Luther King? He wasn't perfect. People argue that we should take down MLK's statues. It's ridiculous. This is a vital part of our culture, and is that people who did great things, and just because they weren't perfect, or they weren't perfect by your misunderstanding of history. Your misunderstanding of history paints them as imperfect people. Doesn't mean we should take them down. Long story short, that's not what capitalism produces necessarily. Our culture is torn between what we've had in the past versus people who are trying to take control. And if you're a company like Gillette, you're trying to study millennials to see how do I best penetrate this market. How do I increase my market share? How do I become more appealing to more people? You're and you know, you have all these reports saying they're very left wing, they're very into social causes. Of course you're going to try it. You know, every company is going to try scooping up the next generation, because once people get attached to a product, a certain type of car, a certain type of razor, a certain type of, you know, for females, makeup, lip balm, it they're very likely to purchase those again. So it's worth the investment to try and see how much market share you can scoop up. That being said, as I mentioned earlier, what's going to happen is these companies are going to try to cater to these, you know, identity groups, try to cater to these SJWs. They're going to find out very quick that none of it's real. No one really cares. I mean, this is all, you know, what people mean by virtue signaling is that people don't really care about, you know, the cause they're talking about. You know, trans people have been around forever, and they've been using the bathroom. You know, they've been finding ways to do this, you know, without making it a huge political issue. And, you know, I know trans people, and they're not talking about it all the time. You know, the people I know who talk about, you know, trans issues the most are all cisgender, you know, and it's just one of those things. Like, it's gonna get old. People are gonna be, you know, tired of hearing about it, you know, and then people are gonna move on. It's not a capitalist thing. It's a society thing. Markets are, you know, going to try and produce anything society wants, and right now it's just very conflicted about, you know, people are very conflicted about what they want, and we're going to have to, you know, Disney's Frozen has a lot of left-wing themes. It has a lot of very left-wing, I don't want to say talking points, but left-wing ideas that have been, you know, reified in a story. So it made a ton of money, and there's a ton of free press saying, you know, mothers have to take their daughters to see Frozen because it has such a good message about, you know, love, and like you don't necessarily need a man, and you know, blah blah blah. That is one of the starting points where people thought that, okay, there's a lot of money to be made by you know, catering to the left wing, and plus people, you know, no company wants to be, you know, left by the side in 5 years. They want to say, well, if this is where society's going, if society's taking a hard left turn, I want to meet society where it is. And it just, you know, millennials are far more conservative than people had previously thought. The last election proved that. And then you combine it with the fact that a lot of these companies are headed by left-wingers, like, you know, Google, YouTube, people who run these large institutions are headed by left-wingers. So it's one of those things that not only does their personal ideology, their personal ideology kind of confirms what the market data was originally telling them. That, you know, it's okay to meet millennials where they are, because their spending habits are what's going to dictate the market in the future, and so we can meet them where they are right now to cater to that. Anyways, there's nothing to worry about. Tim Pool makes this last thing about, like, oh, of course China's going to win because they're so brutal and they're so this and they're so that. You gotta be very careful when you say stuff like that. People are weak, and people are purposefully weak to take control. You know, he was talking about hand clapping in universities, in Oxford particularly. People are being weak on purpose. Just wait till people actually need to get mean. Wait till they, you know, they miss 3 meals a day, you know, and they only get, you know, there's only enough food for 1.5 meals a day. You know, wait until, you know, China starts expanding and people have to get drafted for war. You're going to see society flip like a, you know, flip on a dime. Anyways, long story short, you know, Americans aren't really weak. They're just being taken advantage of by SJWs. And, you know, this radical left-wing ideology that came, you know, about, I mean, really over 150 years ago is when it started. But, you know, most notably in the 20s and the 60s, 70s, 90s, there's always been waves of feminism, you know. It'll pass, and then it'll come back within our lifetimes, within my lifetime for sure. It'll pass for now, and then there'll be, you know, a new group of people demanding X, Y, and Z. You know, after they give transgenders, all transgender individuals, all the rights they could, you know, want. They're gonna move on to attacking, you know, monogamy. They're gonna move on to attacking, you know, the family. I mean, there's turtles all the way down when it comes to left-wing ideology, and what's gonna happen is they're gonna continue to have some places that try it, and those places are gonna fail, and, you know, the places that avoid it, right-wing places, will just continue on, and that's who history will be written about. Anyways, long story short, I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.